What we're seeing right now is a system in which the MAGA Republicans, helped by 40 years of Republican machinations, have managed to create a situation in which they are essentially one party rulers of a number of different states. And that's raising all kinds of red flags going forward. It's got red flags for the past, but it's also got red flags going forward. And where I am going with that is that the Trump administration right now is crazy unpopular. It is underwater on all of its major initiatives. Trump's numbers are as low as they were, as Biden's were after that disastrous debate of about, I guess it was a year ago. This is not a popular administration. And the more people learn about it, the more they dislike it. At the same time, you're also seeing inflation kicking in again as the Trump tariffs start to bite. People really loathe ICE rounding up individuals who have never been charged with a crime, let alone convicted of one, and throwing people into detention camps, including like that ones like that in the Everglades, where we recently learned, I guess it was today, we learned that a 15-year-old boy who has no criminal charges or anything has been incarcerated there, obviously without due process, along with a whole bunch of men. And people don't like that. They have never liked that. And that increasing dislike of the current Republican Party has raised an issue for it going into the midterm elections and the 2028 presidential elections. And this has a long history behind it. What they are trying to do now is to skew our electoral process so that they can establish a one-party state over the entire nation. And you're seeing that in two ways right now. You're seeing that, first of all, with the attempt of the Trump administration to begin to control voting in the states. Remember, states control voting within their own borders. So you're seeing the Trump administration trying to take over the oversight of voting within the states. And you're also seeing it in things like the pressure coming from the White House to redistrict the state of Texas to, as Trump says, pick up 5 more seats for the Republicans. That is essentially to permit Republican lawmakers to choose their own voters so that they can stay in power. Now, that just to step back in a big picture way again here, really, really important to remember that there's a huge difference between voter fraud and election fraud. So voter fraud is what the Republican Party has hammered on since 1986, when it became clear that the American people did not like the tax cuts of the Reagan Revolution and the service cuts of the Reagan Revolution. And that is the argument that people are cheating when they vote. And since 1986, there has been a real focus, not really, since 1986, the idea was to clean up Black voting. But in 1994, after the 1993 Motor Voter Act, in 1994, the Republicans began to say that Democrats were winning elections only because they were having immigrants vote. To be really clear about this, there is no evidence of this. The voting fraud is vanishingly rare. On the rare occasions we have seen it lately, it is usually actually a Republican voting in 2 different places, or voting for a deceased spouse, or voting in some way in a place that they are not eligible to vote. There are always accusations that there is voter fraud. There has been virtually no proof of that. So if you read the articles about it really carefully, you will see that there's all these people who might have committed voter fraud. But the actual number of people who is found, I think your chances of finding somebody who's committed voter fraud are extraordinarily small, because what's the payoff for it? I mean, it is illegal to do that. So if you are somebody who can't vote legally, why would you take that risk in order to have your vote maybe make a difference in a very little way? By the way, this argument that people are importing voters goes all the way back to 1879. And that's an interesting rabbit hole that I probably won't go down today. But you have this idea that there is voter fraud, and so the Republicans, the MAGA Republicans, are now trying to put up all kinds of walls to make it harder and harder and harder to vote. And as I say, they've been doing this since 1986, and really it has taken off after 2013 with the Shelby County versus Holder decision, which essentially gutted the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Um, but you're seeing it really ramp up. And you're also seeing, as we have really seen since 2010, the idea of gerrymandering states so that even in a 50-50 state like North Carolina, the Republicans get most of both the state legislature and the congressional districts. So this is really ramping up right now. As I say, Trump is putting pressure on Texas to redistrict in the middle of the decade. Remember, we have a census every 10 years in order to count how many people, not citizens, but people are in states so that they can be districted in such a way that those states are fairly represented both at the state and at the national level. And Trump's really pressuring Texas to hold a mid-decade redistricting so that Republicans can pick up more seats in Texas. Trump has actually said he wants 5 more seats out of Texas. This is not the way democracy is supposed to work. And in retaliation for that, Gavin Newsom of California has said to Texas, go ahead, you try and redistrict Texas, then I will redistrict California. Again, this is not for more Democrats. That's not the way this whole system is supposed to work. And one of the things that I really hope people will keep their eyes on is going forward and work at is just making sure that representation is fair, that people get to vote. I mean, that's pretty basic. And by the way, that's popular in all parties. Democrats, independents, and Republicans all want to get rid of gerrymandering, and they all want to get rid of voter suppression. All right. If that's voter suppression and voter fraud, which is so rare, this idea that there's voter fraud, that basically the arguments for it are suppressing the vote. What is actually fairly common is election fraud. And that's when you skew the mechanics of the election in such a way that you win, even though most people didn't want you to win. And that's what we're facing with these machinations that you're seeing going on in the states and from the national government going into 2026 and 2028. And again, one of the things I'm really going to push for going forward is that people know this is happening, speak out against it, put pressure at the state level to push back against it, at the national level, support those organizations that are funding lawsuits to make sure this doesn't happen. Because when I look at where we are right now, and I see everything with a historical lens, and a lot of it with the lens of the 19th century, because that's really where my heart is. I see what happened to the American South after the Civil War. And one of the questions I always used to get from my students is, why didn't people fight back when former Confederates took the vote away from Black Americans and from poor white Americans? Because remember, they get shut out of the vote as well in the American South after 1890. Why didn't people fight back? And we're sitting here watching that in real time happen. And it's giving me some answers that surprised me. One of them, I think, is that people don't really see that it's happening. It's very clear to a historical eye that we are seeing a very small group of people exert their power over the government in such a way that they're able to control voting, they're able to control elections so that they can stay in power. But I'm not sure you can see it when you're on the ground. And I wanted to call that out today because I really wanted people to recognize that that we got to fight back against that. And again, think about it like the late 19th century, when it really wasn't clear to a lot of people. It was clear to some people, but it was not clear to a lot of people, not least because in the American South until the 1900s, there really were viable third-party options in a number of the states, and often Black voting in those states could turn an election. So it was a little hard for people to recognize that there was a wholesale disfranchisement going on when they could look in their newspapers and see that there was a meeting of Republicans, for example, in the American South. They just never won. And that idea of commandeering the elections in such a way that only one party can win seems to me to be going national now. And it's going national under the Republican Party. Really important to remember that this is a deeply unpopular administration, and that MAGA is a deeply unpopular movement. And the issues on which the administration keeps insisting it's so popular are actually underwater by as much as 20 points. And that means just an example here, that if 60% of people dislike something and 40% of people like it, that's a 20-point difference. That's not a percentage, that's 20 points. And that's a lot.